This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. No matter what's in your garage, you can fit all your automotive heroes on a shelf. And they've got you covered, whether it's 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, or even the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. Go to ModelCitizenDiecast.com and get 10% off when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for joining me for this special episode of the show. My guest is Eric Minoff of Bonhams Cars, and he's here for a little preview of their Quail Auction coming up just a week from today. Now, I know that not every car lover is necessarily into the auction scene or paying attention to hammer prices, and you could make the case that the auction thing is really a narrow tributary of the car hobby all its own. But I'll tell you what I like about auctions. It's like going to a pop-up car museum for the day. I always learn something new, and I meet interesting people, and some of those people become friends, as a matter of fact. And it's also often the only chance you get to see a particular example of an automobile, like a really rare car or a car with a history of distinction, like a racing car. And in some cases, the cars that come to auction haven't changed hands for decades. So to have them see the light of day again is pretty exciting. And as for the sales prices, it can get really interesting to watch a battle of the bidders. Anyway, that's what I like about auctions. So Eric and I are going to take you through a few notable offerings that Bonhams has in store for Monterey next week, and I hope you enjoy it. Before we get going, I just have a couple more notes. Normally, I release a new episode every 2 weeks, as you know, but I'm going to be on the road for the next 2 weeks, beginning next Monday. First, it's Monterey, and then I'm going on a vintage car tour. So I might take an extra week off, or you might see a new episode on August 23rd, which would actually be on schedule. Does that make sense? What I'm really hoping to do is bring you my chat with Emerson Fittipaldi on the 23rd, because we're recording that live at the Quail next Friday. So make sure you're following the podcast, and it'll just download automatically into your library. You won't miss anything. But either way, you know where to find me. And finally, for those of you who've signed up for the upcoming Horsepower Heritage newsletter, thank you. And if you haven't subbed but you want to, just go to horsepowerheritage.com, click on the contact button, and just say subscribe me to the newsletter, and I'll add you to the list. All right, thanks guys, and here's Eric Minoff from Bonhams Cars. Enjoy. Eric Minoff, Bonhams Cars, good day to you, sir.
Nice to see you. It's great to see you again.
Looking forward to seeing you in Monterey.
Yeah. Hopefully it'll be a bit sunnier than the last time I saw you out in Rhode Island. But we've got our big Quail Auction coming up on August 18th in Carmel, California.
And the previews are Wednesday and Thursday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So people can stroll around, check out the offerings, and the auction starts 11 a.m. on Friday. I'm excited to be there, see these cars in person, and see what they do as they cross the block.
Yeah, likewise. It should be. It's always an exciting week for all of us. It's our biggest auction of the year. Actually, Bonhams as a company, biggest auction of the year. And we're excited to have the most valuable lot on offer in Monterey this week, crossing our block.
Yeah, I suspect I know exactly what car you're talking about. In fact, it's one of my picks today. And so you and I are just going to go through some of our favorites, some highlights from the catalog. So we're going to get into all of that. But Eric, tell me about yourself. Of course, we've met before, but you've been at Bonhams for 15 years now, and you're a dyed-in-the-wool car guy.
Yeah, longer than that, actually. I've been there since 2007. And I do it because I love cars. I love old cars, collector cars. I've liked them since I was a kid, and I stumbled upon a car magazine, and now I get to enjoy working with them for a living.
And you're originally from Chicagoland, right? How's the car scene out there? growing up?
It was pretty interesting. I mean, Chicago is it's a cool place for cars, but not a great place for roads to drive on necessarily. You have to drive pretty far outside of the city, usually up to Wisconsin, to find a road that's of any interest. But there's a thriving car scene out there, and there's a lot of events, especially in the summer. It's one of the advantages of a very seasonal car scene is when the season is on and people are able to take their cars out, everyone does.
Eric, you're a vice president and senior specialist director, Los Angeles at Bonhams Cars. What exactly does that mean? That's a long title.
Basically, it means my primary role is to help people sell cars and find cars they're looking to buy. But then I also work to run our LA office and work to kind of curate and put together our auctions nationally. So that's the nutshell sort of what I do. Mostly talking to people about cars and occasionally talking to colleagues about when they want to take a vacation.
Well, I mean, it doesn't sound half bad talking about cars all day and getting paid to do it. By the way, Bonhams has recently sort of rebranded the automotive department, if you will, of the company. So it was formerly Bonhams Motoring. It's now Bonhams Cars. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so obviously Bonhams is a very large company. We have dozens of collecting specialties, ranging from watches, wine, jewelry, every variety of fine art you can think of: contemporary, modern, European, American, Western, in addition to decorative arts and guns. Whatever you don't need that's expensive, we probably sell it. But motoring section is really three individual groups: the motor cars, motorcycles, and automobilia. And one of the great advantages of being part of a larger auction company is we have a wider breadth and are able to, especially in the situation of an estate, work to cover all the bases. On the flip side, we are part of a larger group, and one of the top complaints we would receive is it was hard to find us on our website. So the Bonhams Cars rebrand was to distinguish Bonhams' largest department by value of property sold a bit more and make it easier to find within the Bonhams ecosystem, and also reflect the fact that to a certain extent cars exist on a different plane than a lot of the other departments do. For example, every other department has their auction in our sale rooms. New York, Los Angeles, a couple in London, Paris, Denmark, Boston, all sorts of places. We have lots of sale rooms. But the car department, except for a couple that occur in our London office on New Bond Street, we don't have auctions in our offices. They happen. So, by having Bonhams Cars have its own branding and also its own website, bonhamscars.com, we can make it easier for our clients to basically find what they're looking for and get directly to the automotive and quite frankly, motoring part of the business, which includes, again, motorcycles and automobilia more quickly and easily.
Well, I have noticed that it is streamlined. So if you're doing a web search, you're looking for the cars, you guys have made it a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's really also so you don't have to sort through, if you're looking for car sales, you might have other interests in collecting, and that's great. But if you want to see a calendar of car sales, you probably want to see the car sales. You don't want to have to figure out how to just find the car sales. And most people are looking at websites that are dedicated to a company that only sells cars. So this allows us to have that sort of look and feel, while still being part of the larger Bonhams ecosystem.
Excellent. Yeah, and I like Louis XIV furniture, by the way, too. But, it's nice to go straight to the cars. Well, Eric, let's get right into it. Why don't you do us the honors, kick us off with your first pick?
I mean, I think that the car that most people are probably are talking about is the Ferrari 412P, which is certainly the star of the auction. The 1967 Ferrari 412B with the body by Fantuzzi. It was originally raced by Maranello concessionaires, and it's been driven by legends including David Piper, Joe Siffert, Richard Atwood. It raced at numerous famous tracks and races, including Le Mans, which we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of this year. Driven to third place at the 1,000 kilometers of Spa and seventh place at Brands Hatch. In addition to, great later race history, interesting ownership, including by John Shakespeare, who famously also owned and sold a trainload of Bugattis to the Schlumpf brothers. And it retains its numbers matching engine, chassis, gearbox, and bodywork, which is pretty special for a race car. A lot of these were driven very hard and suffered the effects of racing. And of course, these are popularly known. If we've seen Ford versus Ferrari, in that movie at least, the evil Ferrari team at Le Mans. So,
yeah, this is the Mac Daddy. The car world is saying this is going to hit 40 million. It will be very exciting if it does. Even if it only gets close to that, it's going to be a thrill. This is one of my picks too, and I'm not surprised you wanted to note this one. So, by way of background, the 412P is essentially a 330P, but without the Lucas fuel injection and a few other things that was reserved for Scuderia Ferrari. So these cars were intended for sales to private racing teams, one of them being Maranello Concessionaires, and that firm has an interesting history, started by Colonel Ronnie Hoare, who was a British artillery officer, sportsman, and car dealer. And he was the first authorized Ferrari agent in the UK. They weren't really selling in the UK prior to him getting involved. And so, as you say, it had a string of well-known drivers. It raced in 67, and then the next year, the FIA changed the rule book. The displacement was too large for the prototype class, but they hadn't built enough of these cars to qualify for the sports car class. The homologation rules said minimum 50 cars. The idea was, of course, that class was for production cars. And so Ronnie Hoare sold the car to David Piper, who raced it in South Africa.
Yeah. As was so often the case, these cars, their purpose designed weapons, and sometimes the weaponry was a bit too powerful for what was allowed to race in one place. But racing is a very international thing, and the rules changed from one place to another. So it did, in David Piper's care, end up racing in South Africa, which had a thriving racing community at the time, and there's some great history of what it did down there, as well as other places it also raced, including in Sweden and things like that, and then eventually did make its way to the United States, where it's been, in its current ownership, road registered and annually state inspected as well.
Yeah, amazing that it's road registered. And by the way, this is only one of two 412Ps that were originally produced by the factory. So it's among the rarest of the rare racing Ferraris. And just to underscore the danger of the era, Lucien Bianchi, Joe Siffert, and Piers Courage, who all drove this car, they were all killed just a few years later in separate accidents. Bianchi was killed in 1969 testing at Le Mans. Courage was killed at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort in 1970. And Joe Siffert lost his life at Brands Hatch in 71 in a BRM. So luckily, Richard Atwood is still with us at 83. David Piper is still with us at the ripe old age of 96. And he's really an authority on these cars, isn't he?
He is. And lest we forget, he did lose his foot, unfortunately not racing, but filming the movie Le Mans, in which, well, not these cars, but replicas of them were featured. So it's certainly it's part of its allure is it comes from this era of racing when death was a constant threat still, and a lot of the legends we hold high are folks who raced these and either cheated death narrowly or cheated death for some period of time only to succumb later. And it's extraordinary the number of guys who were racing these who did indeed race them to their death, if you will. But on the same note, I mean, this is a car that just looks like what a sports racing car should look like. If you ask someone who doesn't know anything about cars, like, what should a sports car look like, they're probably going to describe this car. It just looks like it is going to go 1,000,000 miles an hour, standing still, and it is achingly beautiful. It's designed to go very fast, and it happens to be very good looking.
Absolutely. And, some things really changed in 1969 for Ferrari. For one thing, money was very tight. It was desperate, in fact, and Fiat came into the picture in terms of ownership. And Ferrari concentrated on Formula One after that. So this is sort of the pinnacle of the sports racing Ferrari.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Ferrari winning Le Mans this year was in part a big deal because they hadn't competed at that level at Le Mans in a very, very long time. They had won very successfully in the 50s. They were very successful at Le Mans in the 50s, but they kind of had been out of it for a very long time. I guess they hadn't been out of it as long as Bentley had been when Bentley eventually won Le Mans again.
Right.
But despite their success in sports racing generally, they had not made a concerted effort to win Le Mans basically since the '60s when they won it this year. So it was certainly the apogee of this endurance sports racing for Ferrari. And as you note, they did focus more of their efforts on open wheel racing in Formula One, and the number of purpose designed closed wheel cars. There were still several that followed this that are spectacular machines, but most of the attention was diverted to open wheel Formula One racing.
Yeah, exactly right. And this car had a meticulous restoration some time ago. It's always been in the hands of prominent collectors, and it wears the livery of Maranello Concessionaires, which is Rosso Corso with the Cambridge blue flashes on the nose and tail. So very distinctive.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great look. I mean, there were other liveries that it carried, and there are other 412Ps and 330 P3/4s carried, but it's an iconic look. Maranello Concessionaires is up there with other race teams like Ecurie Cos and things like that, who were privateers that were incredibly successful putting cars to the track and winning.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to see that car sell. I will be there. All right. Well, my first pick, Eric, is the 1987 Mercedes-Benz 560 SL convertible. So kind of an odd pick. It's a mass production car, but here's what I like about it. Great Mercedes build quality. It's a clean, original car. It's a modern classic. You could daily drive this car even today if you wanted. 5.6 liter V8 with Bosch fuel injection. A modest 225 horsepower, automatic transmission. So it's not a sports car, but it is a wonderful modern classic in my view. And anthracite gray with a brown interior. I mean, you can't get more 1980s than that.
Yeah, these are kind of classic machines. The R107, which was built from 1972 up through 1989, is really they've become much more sought after in the last 10 years as people have come to really appreciate how good they are as cars. As you know, you can daily drive them. A lot of them still are daily driven. You do see them quite frequently. They built a lot of them in their various iterations, the 560 being the ultimate iteration with the largest engine, the most developed of the models, which came in everything from a 2.8 liter six-cylinder all the way up to this 5.6 liter V8, which was a pretty big V8 for Mercedes at the time. The livery, you can't go wrong with it, with the anthracite gray over the light brown leather interior. And it does have all the comforts one would expect, radio, air conditioning, heat, power, everything. It's of course got both tops with a matching anthracite gray hardtop, and they are incredibly livable machines and very easy to use day to day, which a lot of people do. And a lot of folks, they're basically cross-shopping these against modern or new cars. It has a great classic look to it. It won't depreciate. You can look like you've really hit your stride as a 1980s mortgage and loans banker.
That's right.
Which is, I guess,
that's exactly
if that's
right.
what you aspire to, then you can do it with this car.
And it's got just under 82,000 miles on the clock.
Break-in mileage. They can go several 100,000 miles without any trouble.
Yeah, I was just going to say, these cars were in daily service in hard conditions all around the world. People don't realize that. They might have been stripped down, but the engineering is there. That said, this is not a car you want to buy and restore. Astronomically expensive to restore. You've got to get a good sorted one or good original one at the start. Otherwise, you're in for a world of hurt. But this car is a very nice original car.
Yeah, I mean there is a reason that the price range on an R107 is anywhere from like $8,000 to $150,000. And that's because you can buy a 560 SL for, under $10,000. And then if you invest, $60,000 or $70,000, you'll have a great $50,000 car.
Right.
So it is worth pursuing a car that is going to be in the shape you ultimately would like it to be in, rather than buying one to turn into that shape, with the other major factors besides condition being mileage. And what's nice about this one is it's in very nice condition, but it has enough mileage that you can drive it and enjoy it without really worrying about the mileage.
Right. And the auction estimate on this is $30,000 to $40,000. So a pretty modest sum when you consider that, as you say, this car is not going to depreciate and it's a very usable classic.
Yes, it's a very easy to enjoy machine.
Excellent. All right, what's your next pick?
My next pick, if we're going to go in the vein of something like that Mercedes, would be, and this is kind of a fun car. We've got a 2002 BMW M5. I'm making air quotes here. Touring. BMW speak for wagon. Started life as a 540i wagon, a 540i Touring, and it was meticulously converted using another M5 into what BMW really should have built, which was the M5 Touring. And they had built M5 Tourings in the previous and the following versions of the M5, but they did not build any actual E39 Tourings. So this one, all cosmetically and mechanically, is exactly what the factory would have done had they built one, with nearly $70,000 in receipts for the conversion alone. Really a spectacular machine, and done by a real enthusiast friend of mine. So I'm very excited to have it, mostly because I'm a wagon nut. But it's a very neat machine, and at $60,000, $80,000 without reserve, it's the perfect thing to throw your stuff in and haul around and and be the only guy with the coolest wagon on the block.
I love wagons too, and a BMW wagon still has that sport-tuned suspension, and they feel like much smaller cars than they actually are when you're behind the wheel. They're tossable, they're responsive. You can haul a bunch of people and stuff and dogs and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. And in this one, you can have an incredible driving experience to boot.
Definitely. Any more to say about that car?
I mean, it has to be seen to be fully appreciated. But if you behold it and really get into the details, you would think that the factory built it.
Yeah, I wish that BMW had brought more wagons to the United States. We are kind of denied a lot of the cooler ones.
Yeah, well, this is a constant conversation I have with friends. Is that Americans don't like wagons? We still too closely associate them with the family truckster from National Lampoon's Vacation. But I mean, I'll take a wagon over an SUV any day of the week, which I drive a wagon, so I practice what I preach. I'm not just talking.
Very good.
But yeah, Americans don't love wagons. And if you look at the wagons that are available today, you can see that wagons are an enthusiast vehicle. Audi, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, all those companies have wagons on offer. Most of the wagons they now sell have cladding on them and have jacked up suspension and things like that to kind of vaguely echo an SUV, to make it look like you're going to someday sort of maybe go off-road. But the only options that don't have the cladding and are actually just cars with a backpack are the high performance ones, the Audi RS6, the Mercedes E63, things like that, which it speaks to the fact enthusiasts love wagons. And most of the time you see a wagon, it's usually a car guy that has it.
Yes, definitely. I love the E63 wagon. That thing is incredible. All right. Well, here's my next pick, Eric. The 1951 Allard J2X, chassis number 3074. And this car has a 250 horsepower Chrysler 331 Hemi, and the car was owned for 18 years by Steve McQueen.
Yep. Pretty neat machine. I mean, McQueen was the consummate enthusiast. I think part of the reason for his lasting appeal is, he's called the king of cool, and I think it's because he was approachable cool, and he had such a great assembly of interesting machines, motorcycles, cars, planes, that he raced, rode, and flew himself. He was very successful in motorsport, not too dissimilar to Paul Newman, for example. McQueen was racing at the highest levels of motorsport in cars that he was campaigning, such as Porsche 908s and things like that. The Allard, Sidney Allard, comes from a long line of folks who, and you can see this in many other companies, They took their the brilliance of European and English chassis design and engineering and added to it the reliability of American drivetrains. The Allard J2 is offered typically with a Chrysler Hemi V8 or a Cadillac V8. This one has the Hemi V8. Great motor, obviously, was used in a lot of other cars, including the Cunninghams, which were ironically fully American cars built in Palm Beach, Florida. But the Allards were just really spectacular machines. They were very successful in period racing. The J2X is just a gorgeous car with cycle front fenders. This big Hemi V8 up front. Beautiful machine. And it was owned for a long time by Steve McQueen, regularly driven and enjoyed, kept at the Santa Paula airport where he kept his collection, and was sold off as part of his estate sale. He passed away of lung cancer.
Mesothelioma, in fact. When he was in the Marine Corps, he was scraping asbestos insulation off pipes in ships and in buildings. And that's what caused the mesothelioma years later.
Yeah, in addition to a lifetime of smoking and then using asbestos fire protection while racing. But he passed away in 1980, and 4 years later, his estate was sold at the Imperial Palace in a big, very famous auction, and this was one of the vehicles offered. So it's only had 2 owners since that sale. So it's really a spectacular opportunity to own a car that's not, even whether or not it had McQueen's ownership, it's only had, 3 owners in the last 6 decades. So that's pretty spectacular on its own. But the fact that McQueen owned it is, the cachet of a car or a vehicle that was owned by McQueen is, it's tough to really appreciate how much folks like it. But typically it's a much greater value added for McQueen's beer farts in the seats, if you will.
Eric, I think of Sidney Allard as a British hot rodder. He saw the promise of American V8s even back in the 30s when Henry Ford was producing the flathead V8. And he was very early to the game in the post-war sports car craze. So the car was popular in the United States in SCCA racing. And as you say, that lightweight European chassis and body, American V8 power, that formula was not lost on Carroll Shelby, who also raced an Allard in the 50s. And he carried that formula on into the Cobra.
Yes, he did. It actually harkens to another lot we're offering in our sale, to the 1957 AC Ace Le Mans Roadster we have.
Yes, let's talk about it.
So this is a pretty special car. It was campaigned by Ken Rudd, who was basically the works agent for racing, and it was brought to Le Mans in 1957. Before it was brought there, they put in a brand new AC Ace Bristol motor for the car, which had been the twin cam 2-liter straight 6, replacing the overhead valve inline 6. They modified the bodywork to include things such as a hood scoop, which would be the first AC Ace with a hood scoop, which of course Cobras had. They put in side vents behind the front wheels to promote better airflow out of the engine there, which of course Cobra had as well. And it had a number of other interesting features. The nose of the car actually was much more akin to what the Cobra ended up with, which was more of an oval nose that kind of stuck out slightly. And the car was raced there at Le Mans, came in second in class and 10th overall, very successfully. Shortly after the race, it ended up coming to the United States, raced here at Watkins Glen and places like that in the SCCA. And the current owner bought it in 1966. So he's had it for quite some time. He used it as a daily driver, living in the mid-Atlantic, in the D.C. area, which was made somewhat difficult by the fact that as a race car, it didn't have a heater. Of course, it didn't have AC, but not much did back then, but it didn't have a heater either. And he was a rower, so he also used it to carry his rowing scull on occasion. Which probably makes it the only AC Ace to have ever done that, let alone Le Mans car to have done that. And it's recently been restored, really spectacular machine, restored back to its Le Mans livery, but a very special and unique machine with, it's been owned by the same guy for 60 years, so that's pretty special.
Remarkable. And it's in AC green, which is a beautiful light metallic green, very very complimentary on this car. I love the cut down Perspex windscreen, very racy.
Mm-hmm.
As you would expect, it ticks all the boxes, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Actually, Aston Martin complained that the AC green was too close to the Aston Martin's British racing green, which is why in the nose of the car it says in big letters AC, so you wouldn't mistake the two on the track.
And you might do if they came by you at speed and you weren't paying close attention.
Yeah, I think you'd have to be really not paying attention, given the fact the 57 would have been the DBR1 was a much different looking car.
Very true. Very true. I love that car. What's the auction estimate on the car?
It's $750 to $950.
Okay, rarefied air.
Mm-hmm.
But find another, right?
It is the one. It's the only of its kind.
All right, very good. My next pick is the 1914 Simplex 50 horsepower Touring. So I threw this car up on the Instagram account last week. I just absolutely love it. I really have a special place in my heart for brass cars, Eric, and this one is exquisite. Coachwork by the Holbrook Company of New York. And so this is a 50 horsepower, 597 cubic inch, 4-cylinder T-head. So a very exclusive club, the 500 cubic inch club of the time. And the car has a transaxle, but then it's got dual chain final drive, which is a very interesting setup. And the chains are enclosed in wonderfully cast cases. Of course, it's a very big car, brass and lacquer and wonderful details, incredible wire wheels. This car was delivered new to a gentleman named Frederick Frelinghuysen, who was the Frelinghuysen's were an old colonial family, and they were prominent businessmen and politicians in New York and New Jersey. So this car would sort of befit the grand families of the day, right? Big, luxurious, powerful. It's got incredible details like a liquor cabinet. This is a 7-passenger Touring, so it's got 2 jump seats, right, Eric?
Yes, it's got a pair of jump seats in the back. I mean, it's a very big car. You know, these were the ultimate luxury car one would buy, and as you noted, it was owned new by Mr. Frelinghuysen, who comes from a long historied family in the United States, and it qualifies for any number of phenomenal events. But you know, this is with a 50 horse engine, you can get up to highway speeds. You can't slow down very well with rear wheel brakes only, but you can get up to highway speeds, and there's a lot of great tours like the Farts Tour and the Brass Tours that you can do with these, and it's got great long-term history with pictures of it in the 60s and things like that at AACA events, and it's one of a number of phenomenal brass cars we're offering, including the 1908 Lorraine Dietrich, which has a 16.4 liter 4-cylinder, which is quite a bit bigger even than this, and then also probably one of the most famous brass era cars, the 1916 Stutz Bearcat 4C, or Model 4C Bearcat, which is the ex-A.K. Miller car, which makes it one of the greatest Bearcats in existence. With the principal issue being, and this is true of the Simplex as well, a lot of these had their bodies changed as history went on because very few of them were delivered with sporting bodies. The Simplex has a great touring body on it, and it's managed to retain that body, which is pretty special. Stutz offered a variety of bodies. They offered the Bearcat body, which is the most famous, which is basically just 2 seats and a fuel tank. But most of them were ordered as touring cars or coupes and things like that. So this is a true Bearcat with known history from new. And it is particularly special in that it was part of the A.K. Miller collection in Vermont. A.K. Miller being an absolute Stutz fanatic, but also a famous curmudgeon and hermit. And he bought up an incredible group of Stutzes, all sorts, including this Bearcat, which he considered to be the jewel of his collection. It's the only car in which he was photographed. So it's the only Stutz in which there's a photograph of him in it. And his collection was sold off after he fell off a ladder, which was from a Stutz fire truck when he was doing some repairs on his barn. It's had great history since then. Only 2 owners in the past 80 years. It's really a special machine, and we're very excited to offer it alongside that Simplex and the Lorraine Dietrich and some other great brass machines.
A.K. Miller was sort of in the same vein as Barney Pollard or, for that matter, John Shakespeare. They all kind of squirreled away these amazing cars, and they weren't kept in the most sanitary of environments. So the cars did, show a bit of wear over the years, but this one has a wonderful patina and it's untouched.
Yes, it is untouched, and it's documented as a 100% genuine Bearcat, and as a 1916, it's the most developed version of the Bearcat, which just makes it such a special machine.
Eric, what's the auction estimate on the Stutz?
A 1.75 million to 2.75 million.
Okay, again, rarefied air, but how many Bearcats might be for sale at any given time, and particularly in such original shape, as you say?
Among genuine ones, the Kowaleski Bearcat is probably the only one that comes close to rivaling this one.
Right. So, incidentally, getting back really quick to the Simplex Tourer, that car new was $5,750. That's in 1914, right? So, adjusted for inflation, that car cost $177,000 new in 1914.
Yeah, and that was for the chassis and drivetrain. The body was extra.
Exactly. At a time, by the way, when it wasn't uncommon to commission a couple of different bodies and change them out seasonally.
Yes, you'd have your summer body and your winter body, and you'd have them changed. And often they would be modernized rather than buying a brand new chassis and engine and all that. You could get a slightly more modern body. So to have a car that also has its body like that is quite special.
Very good. Any other cars you want to highlight?
Well, the last car I think I'd want to bring up to kind of bring things into the modern era as far as more young timer collectibles, if you will, is Lot 90 in the sale. It's a 1997 Subaru Impreza 22B STI prototype. So it was the first prototype for the 1998 22B Impreza, number 000 of 400, and it was displayed at the 1997 Tokyo Motor Show. It's only got 70 kilometers on it at the time of cataloging. And the 22B is just an absolutely mythic machine. It's hard to fully express how special these are, because to the untrained eye, it just looks like a, Subaru Impreza 2.5 RS with box flares. But they are completely different. Mechanically, they share nothing. The body was indeed punched out, and that is metal. And they drive spectacularly well. I think the younger collectors are becoming more enthusiastic with them, having, quote, driven them in games like Gran Turismo, which really introduced a lot of Americans and even some Europeans to this JDM world of cars that were only available, JDM being Japanese domestic market. They're only available in Japan and to a lesser extent in the UK and Australia and places like that. So this is a really special machine. It's kind of the lodestone, if you will, of Subarus that are, we consider to be popular today, and kind of how Subaru has transitioned its brand from being just a sort of outdoor, the power beauty of all-wheel drive, to being a sports sedan and sports vehicle maker with the STI line, which, we obviously got in the United States much later. But these have become highly sought after machines, and the values of them have just skyrocketed in the last 5 years, basically, as they've become closer and closer to and are now legal to import into the United States.
When you think of the WRC, I think of Subaru, at least.
Yes.
And this car's auction estimate is $450,000 to $550,000, which some people may, have a double take. It's a Japanese car, but the Japanese collector scene has really come into its own. I would say it's fully matured. And particularly with guys like Myron Vernis and Mark Brinker out there, who wrote that wonderful book, A Quiet Greatness. I've had Myron on the show.
Yes, they're both good friends of mine, and I talk to them pretty regularly. I have their book, obviously. And I think they're helping to make more Americans aware of this phenomenal world, in part by producing the greatest compendium of the Japanese car world in English. Because it's historically been a very insular market. They don't really love to see their cars leave the country.
Right.
And with the 25-year rule, the more interesting cars that we were playing on video games like Gran Turismo, which came out in the late 90s, are now legal to import.
Yeah, I think you're really right about the impact of that game on this generation, this new generation of car collectors. In a way, I find that Japanese cars, in terms of collectability, have sort of been a victim of the Japanese car industry's incredible success in the United States. They absolutely trounced American manufacturers starting in the 70s. And yet, we tend to think of them as appliances.
Yeah, I think one of the struggles that Japanese cars have had is similar to what European cars used to have, which is, I think we think of European cars today as Mercedes and Ferrari and things like that, but we forget that the European cars that actually popularized European cars in the United States were Volkswagen. So they were not seen as super premium cars, just as much as the Japanese came to the market as lower end, cheaper alternatives. And there is a generational shift of people that have associated just as much as the European car scene, 40, 50 years ago in the collecting hobby in the United States, people didn't buy many European cars. They bought big American cars. And Japanese cars, it's a similar thing. That generation of people who fully appreciate Japanese cars, because when they think of Japanese cars, they aren't thinking of the cheapest Toyota. They're thinking of the most expensive Lexus. That is creating a shift in the perception of what a Japanese car is and how much value it may have. And, this happens in everything. We are entering a period where there are more and more younger collectors who have greater and greater appreciation for Japanese cars. They are not prejudiced against them for being Japanese cars and not being European cars, for example, and are valuing them accordingly.
Right. Cars like the Acura NSX, cars like the Toyota 2000 GT, if you want to go back even farther, and of course, this Subaru.
This Subaru, Skyline R30, all this Skylines actually, but the R33s, some of the very special versions of the R33s are 7-figure cars, which if you had told people a few years ago that a Nissan is going to sell for $1 million, they would have laughed at your face.
No doubt about that. All right, Eric Minoff, Vice President and Senior Specialist Director, Los Angeles, from Bonhams Cars. Great to see you again, my friend.
See you soon in California.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. Don't forget, if you want to support the show with a donation, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage, and you can throw a few bucks in the gas tank. Tell your friends, leave me 5 stars and a quick review on Apple Podcasts, and that's all much appreciated. So until next time, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.